I was seated near a decorative column not behind it, just near enough that I wasn't quite visible from the head of the table. That felt intentional. The chair wobbled slightly, its leg uneven against the polished oak of the Thornton Estate dining hall. I adjusted my hand-painted cotton scarf, the one I'd made during a quiet spring in Burlington. No one commented. No one asked how I'd been. To my left, my cousin Ethan adjusted his cufflinks and asked Samantha how the Manhattan apartment renovation was going. Across the table, my brother Lucas laughed at a joke he hadn't made, and my mother, Margaret Thornton, lifted her wine glass with that practiced grace that had once graced the pages of New England Home. She hadn't looked in my direction since I arrived. Then came the whisper. "She's not even a real Thornton," my mother murmured to someone on her right, low enough that she thought no one else could hear. But I heard, and so did the lawyer seated at the head. His name was Walter Grayson. He'd been my grandfather's legal counsel for decades. Gray hair, measured voice eyes that scanned the room like a surgeon prepped for dissection. He waited for the hush. "We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of William Theodore Thornton," he began. A man of deep convictions, occasionally unpopular ones. That drew a few polite chuckles. I didn't laugh. Item by item, the will unfolded like a performance. The Manhattan apartment, as expected, to Samantha. The Vineyard Estate in Napa Valley to Lucas. The Cadillac collection to my father Robert. Jewelry Stock's legacy assets. Everyone received their due. Everyone except me. I kept still. I'd learned that growing up as Emily Rose Carter, technically a Thornton biologically, but emotionally a misplaced piece in their polished puzzle. I'd chosen to teach art in a public school in Burlington, Vermont. That had been enough to exile me. I thought perhaps I wasn't going to be mentioned at all. Then Walter adjusted his glasses, and finally he said, "Regarding the controlling interest in Thornton Legacy Group, the Boston estate, in the consolidated investment portfolio valued at $526 million. The room went very still. "I hereby bequeath these assets in full to Ms. Emily Rose Carter." A silence heavier than oak filled the space. My mother's wine glass shattered against the floor. Lucas stood up so quickly his chair skidded across the tile. Samantha made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a scoff, but said nothing. I didn't move. Not yet. I looked at Walter. His eyes met mine with the faintest nod. Then, before anyone could speak, he added, "There's a video message from Mr. Thornton to accompany this clause. At his request, it will be played now." The screen came alive, and there he was, my grandfather, William Theodore Thornton, staring straight into the camera. "If you're watching this," he began, "then you've just learned something unexpected." He smiled. I imagine the room is a mess. He wasn't wrong, and I had no idea what was coming next. My grandfather's voice faded, but his image remained frozen on the screen. Calm, intentional. Before the next words played, my mind had already gone somewhere else. Back to the first time I realized I was invisible. I was 12. Samantha had just won a regional debate competition, and there was a celebration dinner at the estate. My mother had commissioned a custom cake with Samantha's face printed in edible silver. I'd made a card hand-painted. I remember using burnt sienna and cobalt blue colors I hadn't mastered yet. I placed it at Samantha's seat. When dinner began, the card was gone. I found it later in the trash with a wine stain across the front. No one mentioned it. No one ever did. From that year forward, I stopped trying to be seen. At 17, I told my parents I'd been accepted into RISD Rhode Island School of Design. My mother paused only long enough to say, "I suppose we'll have to pretend that counts." That night, my grandfather called. Just him. No pretense. "Don't wait for their applause." "Em," he said, "they'll never clap for what they can't understand." It was the first time he called me that. Em. He came to one of my student exhibitions. He didn't announce it. I only knew he'd been there because someone left a handwritten note tucked behind the frame of my watercolor series. The one with the broken gate. Pure truth. Don't fix it. He never said it was him. He didn't need to. In my early 20s, I moved to Burlington, taught at a public high school, started leading community art programs for seniors. Most of my family thought I was in Maine. I never corrected them. Samantha went to Yale. Lucas followed Dad into finance. Holiday cards came with staged photos and engraved signatures. Mine never arrived. I stopped checking the mail around December. Once my name had been left off the donor plaque at a family event, though I'd contributed more than both my siblings combined. When I asked, Margaret smiled and said, "Oh, that was probably a clerical thing. You know how these things happen, but they didn't happen to Samantha or to Lucas, just to me." And yet every few years, a small envelope would arrive. No return address. Inside a newspaper clipping a museum ticket, sometimes a quote written in fountain pen ink. One note simply said, "Character is quieter than legacy. Build the quiet thing." I kept them in a shoebox under my bed. The screen flickered. The video resumed. William Thornton leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if to pierce time. "You've all grown used to mistaking polish for worth," he said. "But I spent the last 15 years watching not what you said, but what you chose not to see." Samantha shifted in her chair. Lucas opened his mouth, but closed it again. And I sat there, that scarf still around my neck, wondering had he been watching me this whole time, or had he been trying to teach me to watch myself 3 weeks before the will reading a letter arrived. Heavy cream cardstock embossed crest. My name, handwritten in ink that looked like it had never touched a printer. Ms. Emily Rose Carter, care of Maplewood Public School, Burlington, Vermont. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the kitchen counter next to my ceramic bowl of apples, unopened for almost 2 days. When I did, it simply read, "You are requested to be present at the reading of the last will and testament of William T. Thornton. Location, the Thornton Estate, Boston, Massachusetts. Date, June 6th. Time, 2 p.m. There was no mention of what I'd been left. No hint of expectation, just that I was requested. Not invited, not required, requested. 2 days later, my mother called. The first call from her in 6 years. "Emily," she said, her voice clipped and elegant. "I assume you received the correspondence." I held the phone an inch away from my ear. "Yes." "Well, you'll want to look presentable. There will be family attorneys." "The usual." "Of course," I said. She paused. "Then William was fond of you. No one's fault, really. Some men get sentimental in their later years." I didn't answer. She didn't expect me to. She ended the call with, "See you then, dear." That was all. I booked a train, not a flight. I couldn't stomach the idea of arriving quickly. Instead, I sat by the window for 8 hours watching spring creep up the New England coast in patches lilacs blooming like secrets no one wanted to share. I wore the scarf, the same one I'd painted during the year I finally stopped asking to be let back in. I wasn't sure why I packed it. Or maybe I was. Maybe it was armor. As the estate gates came into view, tall and too ornate for their own good, I felt something settle over me. Not anger, not grief. A strange kind of curiosity, like walking into a museum of a childhood you barely remembered, but still knew how to navigate in the dark. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The smell of lavender near the windows, the hollow sound of heels across hardwood, the way everyone greeted each other just a few decibels too loudly, as if trying to outsmile whatever tension hung in the air. No one greeted me, but then again, no one told me to leave, so I stayed. I took the seat by the column and waited to find out why. The first 45 minutes of the will reading passed like a poorly directed play, everyone pretending not to anticipate their moment, yet stealing glances toward Walter every time he inhaled. The Manhattan apartment to Samantha, of course, the vineyard in Napa Valley to Lucas. Naturally, the silverware collection to my father Robert and the jewelry to Margaret, accompanied by a note in grandfather's handwriting that read, "For appearances." There were a few strained laughs. No one asked what that meant. I waited quietly as the gifts were passed out like acknowledgments of loyalty. Each item was met with nods, raised eyebrows, the small gestures of approval that people like my family mistook for love. I began to believe I wouldn't be mentioned at all. Perhaps I had misread everything, the notes, the scarf, the quiet visits. Perhaps in the end, he had loved me, but not enough to disturb the balance. Then Walter adjusted his glasses. And finally he said, regarding the controlling interest in Thornton Legacy Group, the Boston estate, and the consolidated investment portfolio total valuation, $526 million. A breath caught in the room. These assets are hereby bequeathed in full to Ms. Emily Rose Carter. The silence wasn't immediate. It needed a moment to register. Then Margaret's wineglass dropped. The stem snapped before it hit the floor. Lucas stood up so fast his chair scraped the tile and clanged against an oak leg. Samantha blinked once, twice, then turned sharply toward Walter. My father didn't move, but his hand tightened around the edge of the table knuckles white. All eyes turned to me. I remained still. I had learned the power of stillness in a family addicted to spectacle. Walter cleared his throat. There is an additional instruction. At Mr. Thornton's request, a recorded message will now be played. A staff member dimmed the lights. The screen flickered again. There he was. My grandfather sat behind his old walnut desk, the one with the carved eagle's feet in hidden compartments. The lighting was soft, like he had known how this would feel. If you're watching this, he said, then you've just learned something unexpected. Or perhaps not. He smiled slightly. Legacy, as I've come to understand, is not what you leave behind in dollars, but in decency, and most of you. His eyes seemed to search the room. Have mistaken polish for principle. Margaret shifted in her seat. My father exhaled through his nose. Samantha's expression didn't change. Over the last 15 years I've watched, he continued. Not your business metrics, but your choices. Small ones, quiet ones. He began to list them. How Margaret had refused to extend health care support to the housekeeper's family after her diagnosis. How Robert had buried a 7-figure loss using a shell firm in the Caymans. How Lucas had quietly settled a harassment claim without ever admitting fault naturally. How Samantha had forced a whistleblower out of the philanthropic arm after it made the papers. No one interrupted. The room had calcified. And Emily, he said, finally turning. My breath caught. She never asked for a seat at this table. She built her own. He leaned in slightly. Character doesn't perform. It persists. Then the video ended. For a moment, no one spoke, and then Samantha asked the question. I couldn't believe she still had the nerve to ask, is this contestable? Walter blinked. Legally, no. William ensured all counsel reviewed the revisions. The trust structure has already been enacted. Another silence, and I just sat there in the chair by the column, wondering had I really been the plan all along, or had I simply been the last one left standing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from joy, and certainly not from triumph. There's a strange loneliness that comes from being seen too clearly, like standing under a spotlight after decades in the wings. I lay on the guest bed in the North Wing suite formerly reserved for press. The sheets still smelled of lavender and starch. Outside the window, the marsh grass whispered with every gust of wind like it knew something I didn't. My phone buzzed at 2:11 a.m. One new message, Samantha. I think we need to talk. Just us sisters. Grandpa wouldn't want this to divide us. At 2:32 a.m., another one from Lucas. Not judging, just confused. This doesn't make sense. Maybe legal can fix it. And then at 3:04 a.m., the call I knew would come. My mother. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. Emily, I'm not angry. I think you're overwhelmed. You don't know how these things work. We should meet with family counsel and go through the details together. There's a lot to unpack. William was old. He could be manipulated. She never said by you, but I heard it. It felt rehearsed, like the same script she'd used with donors or reporters or employees she wanted to quietly remove. By morning, I hadn't responded. I'd packed my bags, but I wasn't sure where I'd go next. The estate didn't feel like mine, only like a house left empty by someone who saw too much. When I stepped into the library to clear my head, a staff member approached. Miss Carter, he said, there's something for you. It was left with instructions. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it. My full name written in a hand I'd recognize even blindfolded. Emily Rose Carter inside was a letter. M, if you're holding this, it means I've done what I couldn't say aloud. I know this inheritance will not feel like a gift at first. It's a burden. You were always the only one who understood the difference. You won't need them to help you, but you may still want to help them. That's your strength and your temptation. Don't let kindness become your chain. The company is yours. So is the legacy, but your life that's still only yours to shape. Don't go back to being small just so they can stay comfortable. The paper shook in my hand. I read it again, not for clarity, but for confirmation. He'd known they'd try to make me feel unworthy. He'd known they'd use guilt instead of anger. He'd known I might fall for it, but he had left me something better than money. Permission. The family summoned me to the conservatory. Not officially, of course. No one used words like summon when you were supposedly part of them again, but the message was clear. Everyone would be there, and it was just a conversation. I walked in 5 minutes late deliberately. They were already seated, my father by the glass wall, arms crossed, Margaret in a pale green dress too soft for the sharpness in her voice, Samantha and Lucas at either end of the curved sofa like opposing counsel. There was tea on the table. No one had poured mine. Margaret spoke first. "Emily, this isn't about money. Of course it wasn't. It's about preserving what your grandfather built," Lucas added. "We're not here to argue." Samantha leaned forward. "You don't have to do anything drastic, just delegate. Let Walter handle the transitions. You don't need to be involved day to day." I didn't say anything. My silence stretched. "Look," said Robert finally, "we all know he loved you. That's not the issue, but you're not experienced in this world." I looked around the room. They didn't want to take it back outright. That would make them look greedy. They wanted me to feel unqualified enough to give it up myself. "I understand your concern," I said slowly. Margaret visibly relaxed. "I understand it because you've never once asked what I've done, what I built, who I became." I took a step forward. "You saw me painting scarves and thought I'd failed. You saw me teaching and thought I'd given up. You saw me quiet, so you assumed I was nothing." No one interrupted. I pulled a folded paper from my bag, set it on the table. "My name is on the legal registration of Thornton Legacy Group as of 6 months ago. Grandfather made me CEO in escrow, quietly, so I could learn." Samantha blinked. "That's not possible." "It is," I said. "He brought me in under a consulting firm when none of you bothered to notice. I've been reviewing board strategy for 9 months. I restructured 3 departments you thought Walter handled." Lucas stood. "Why wouldn't he tell us?" "Because he already knew you wouldn't listen." I turned to Margaret. "Do you remember saying I wasn't a real Thornton?" She flinched. Slight, but it was there. "I'm not here to punish you. I don't need you to approve of me. I don't need a reconciliation dinner or a new group photo. I came here because he trusted me to finish what he started, and I will." The room fell quiet. Then Margaret whispered, "You've changed." I smiled. "No, I just stopped shrinking." I reached for the teapot, poured myself a cup, stirred it slowly, and now I said, "I suggest you decide if you're capable of working under someone you once dismissed." Samantha's jaw tightened. Lucas stared at the floor. No one responded, so I took my tea and walked out. Not in anger, just in finality. 3 months later, I stood in the center of the Thornton boardroom, not as a guest, not as a shadow, as the woman whose name was now etched into the walnut plaque outside the door. Emily Rose Carter, Chief Executive Officer, Thornton Legacy Group. The transition wasn't quiet. Some board members quit. A few investors panicked, but most stayed not out of loyalty, but out of curiosity. They wanted to see what the ghost child of the Thornton family would do with the empire she was never supposed to touch. I didn't burn anything down. I restructured the foundation arm, reinstated the whistleblower program, doubled the salary of support staff. At our first press gala, I didn't invite Margaret, Robert, Samantha, or Lucas not to punish them, to let the silence finally speak louder than all their words. Instead, I invited people my grandfather had quietly supported: scholarship recipients, former groundskeepers, community organizers. A few of them cried when they saw the nameplate at the podium. So did I. In my first speech, I didn't talk about legacy or dynasty. I talked about repair. Sometimes I said, "We inherit the damage more than the wealth, but we also inherit the chance to choose differently." Applause followed, not roaring, but real. Afterward, I returned to the estate. I walked into the old studio on the 3rd floor, the one no one had entered in years. He'd left it untouched. Still there, the unfinished oil painting of the family marshlands at dusk. Sky half done, a single white heron sketched but never filled. I remembered the last time I'd seen him work on it. "You going to finish that?" I had asked, half joking. He'd smiled. "No, that's for you." I hadn't understood then. Now I did. I picked up the brush. The paint was dried, but I didn't mind. I opened New Tube's soft ochre pale blue, the same cobalt blue I'd used as a child, and I filled in the sky. Not perfectly, not as he would have done, but in my own hand. When I stepped back, the heron was finally flying, and that was enough. The next Christmas, I received a card from Margaret. No handwriting, just a generic printout with a photo of the family, Samantha holding a glass of wine, Lucas standing near the tree, Robert in the background looking distracted. They'd sent it to the corporate office. Inside it said, "Wishing you peace this season. You are, of course, always welcome." There was no signature, no mention of what they'd done or not done, no apology, no acknowledgement, just the word welcome. I placed the card on my desk, stared at it for a full minute, then quietly opened the drawer. From the same place where I kept his letters, I pulled out the oldest one, the one that only said, "Build the quiet thing." I took a pen, wrote 3 words on the Christmas card. I was there. Then I placed it back in an envelope. No return address, no message. I mailed it to the estate. No one replied. A week later, I visited the gallery in downtown Boston that now hosted part of our new community art initiative. The walls were full of donated works pieces from anonymous creators who never had a chance to show their voice. In the back corner was one of my own. Small, simple, a watercolor of a chair worn velvet slightly off balance tucked behind a column. Its title scrolled underneath unseen. I didn't wait to hear reactions. I left through the side entrance into the winter wind that rolled off the harbor. No scarf this time. I didn't need it. Emily Rose Carter learns a profound lesson about self-worth and the power of quiet resilience. Throughout her life, her family dismissed her as insignificant, valuing polish over substance and overlooking her artistic passion and community work. Her grandfather's unexpected bequest of the Thornton Legacy Group worth $526 million validates her character, not her conformity. His video message and letter reveal that true legacy lies in decency and persistence, not spectacle. Emily realizes she doesn't need her family's approval to define her value. Their attempts to undermine her only expose their own flaws. By embracing her role as CEO, restructuring the company with integrity, and prioritizing repair over revenge, she steps out of the shadows without bitterness. Her grandfather's words, "Don't go back to being small just so they can stay comfortable," teach her to reject guilt and embrace her strength. Painting the heron in his unfinished work symbolizes her claiming her place not as a reaction to their dismissal, but as a continuation of her own quiet truth. Emily's lesson is clear. Self-worth is built through authenticity and courage, not the applause of those who never truly see you.
The bank statement arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, addressed to me as the primary account holder of the Marcus Davidson Trust Fund. I'd been receiving these monthly statements for 3 years, ever since my 22nd birthday when I'd legally assumed full control of the trust my grandfather had established for me. Balance: $247.83. I stared at the number, certain there had been some mistake. The previous month's balance had been $200,247.83. Someone had withdrawn exactly $200,000 from my trust fund. I logged into the online banking portal using my credentials that only I and my financial advisor were supposed to have. The transaction history showed a single wire transfer dated March 15th. Transfer to Davidson family account $200,000, authorized by Richard Davidson, trustee. Richard Davidson, my stepfather of 12 years who had exactly zero legal authority over my trust fund and hadn't been a trustee since my grandfather's death in 2019. The family group chat was unusually active that morning. Mom was posting photos of their new RV, a luxury motorhome that probably cost around $200,000. Richard surprised me with early retirement, she'd written. We're going to travel the country. My half-sister Emma, Richard's daughter from his first marriage, had commented with multiple heart eye emojis. Dad is the best. Can't wait to visit you guys at all the cool places. My half-brother Jake had added, finally. Mom deserves this after everything she's been through. Everything she's been through. They meant my father's death when I was 13, and the subsequent financial struggles before Mom married Richard. What they didn't mention was that those struggles had ended when I turned 18 and began receiving income distributions from my trust fund. Money that had helped pay for their house down payment, Jake's college tuition and Emma's private school fees. I screenshot everything before calling the bank. First National Trust Department, this is Jennifer. This is Marcus Davidson. I need to speak with someone about unauthorized access to my trust fund immediately. Let me transfer you to our fraud department, Mr. Davidson. The fraud specialist, David Chin, reviewed my account while I waited. Mr. Davidson, I'm looking at the transaction you're referring to. It shows authorization from Richard Davidson, who's listed in our system as a secondary trustee. Richard Davidson has not been a trustee since 2019. I have the legal documentation removing him from that role after my grandfather's death. Sir, our records show him as still having trustee authority. Do you have documentation of his removal? I have everything. Court orders, probate documents and signed agreements. Richard Davidson has no legal authority over my trust fund. Then we have a problem. This appears to be embezzlement of trust assets. David walked me through the process of filing a formal complaint. Internal investigation would begin immediately, law enforcement would be contacted, and all remaining assets would be frozen to prevent further unauthorized access. How long has Mr. Davidson had access to your account? I pulled up my records. He was added as a secondary trustee in 2011 when he married my mother. He was supposed to be removed in 2019 when I became sole trustee, but it appears that never happened on the bank's end. Has he made other unauthorized transactions? I spent the next hour going through 3 years of statements with David. Richard had been systematically skimming smaller amounts, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, for the entire time. The total came to $347,000 over 3 years. Mr. Davidson, this is felony embezzlement. We're required to report this to federal authorities immediately. Good. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for our regular Tuesday family dinner. Mom was in the kitchen, humming while she cooked, occasionally glancing out the window at the new RV parked in their driveway. Marcus. Perfect timing. Richard's just showing Jake the new RV. Isn't it amazing? Through the window I could see my stepfather giving Jake a tour of their $200,000 purchase. My $200,000 purchase, technically. It's very nice. How did you afford it? Mom's expression shifted slightly. Well, Richard's been planning this for years. Saving and investing. He's always been so good with money. Richard came through the back door with Jake trailing behind him, both of them grinning like they'd just won the lottery. Marcus. Come see the RV. Fully loaded, satellite TV, full kitchen, memory foam mattress. We got a great deal on it. How great. $200,000 for a rig that would normally cost $250. The dealer was motivated to sell. I nodded. That's interesting. Where did the $200,000 come from? The kitchen went quiet. Mom stopped stirring the pasta sauce. Jake looked between Richard and me, sensing tension he couldn't identify. From savings, Richard said carefully. Years of careful financial planning. What kind of savings? Investment accounts. Retirement funds. Various sources. I pulled out my phone and opened the bank app, holding it so Richard could see the screen clearly. Is one of those sources my trust fund? Richard's face went pale, then red, then back to pale. Mom set down the wooden spoon and turned around slowly. What are you talking about? She asked. Someone withdrew $200,000 from my trust fund yesterday. The same day you bought a $200,000 RV. Richard cleared his throat. Marcus, we need to talk about family responsibilities. That trust fund was set up when you were a child, but you're an adult now. Family priorities change. Family priorities? Your mother and I have worked hard our entire lives. We've supported you, helped you through college, given you a home and family. It's time for that investment to pay dividends to the people who earned it. I stared at him. You think you earned my grandfather's money? I think real children deserve that money more than someone who isn't even blood family, Richard said, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke. Your grandfather is dead. Your mother is my wife. This family's financial decisions should benefit the people who actually belong here. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. Mom looked horrified. Jake looked confused. Richard looked like a man who had just realized he'd said something unforgivable but was too proud to back down. I calmly replied, "Interesting perspective." Then I walked out of the kitchen, got in my car and drove home to make a phone call. U.S. Attorney's Office, Eastern District, how may I direct your call? I need to speak with someone about felony embezzlement of trust assets. The federal prosecutor I spoke with, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Martinez, reviewed the basic facts over the phone. Mr. Davidson, do you have documentation of your sole authority over the trust? Complete documentation. Court orders, bank agreements, everything. And the person who took the money? My stepfather. No legal relationship to me, no authority over the trust, and clear knowledge that he was stealing. He essentially confessed an hour ago. How much money are we talking about? $200,000 in the most recent theft, but preliminary investigation shows approximately $350,000 total over 3 years. That's multiple federal felony charges. Are you prepared to prosecute your stepfather? I thought about Richard's words. Real children deserve this money more. You're not even blood family. The casual way he'd stolen from me while sitting at family dinners, accepting my help with his mortgage payments, and pretending to care about my future. I'm prepared to prosecute. I'll need you to come in tomorrow with all your documentation. We'll start the formal investigation immediately. I spent that evening organizing 3 years of financial records. Bank statements, trust documents, legal papers establishing my sole authority over the fund, and screenshots of every suspicious transaction. My phone rang constantly. Mom, Jake, Emma, even some extended family members who'd apparently heard about the family emergency. I let every call go to voicemail. The voicemails were illuminating. Mom crying and asking me to work this out as a family. Jake confused and asking if I was really going to call the cops on Dad. Emma furious, leaving a message that I was destroying the family over money, and that Dad deserves that money after everything he's done for us. Everything he's done for us. Like stealing from me for 3 years while I helped pay his mortgage, his children's expenses, and his family vacations. Wednesday morning, I met with AUSA Martinez at the federal building downtown. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in white-collar crime. Mr. Davidson, I've reviewed the documentation you sent over. This is one of the clearest cases of trust embezzlement I've seen. Your stepfather had no legal authority, clear knowledge that he was stealing, and he's made statements that amount to confessions. What happens now? We open a formal federal investigation. FBI will execute search warrants for financial records, interview witnesses, and build the criminal case. Given the amount involved and the duration of the theft, we're looking at significant prison time. How significant? Embezzlement of this magnitude typically carries 10 to 20 years in federal prison. The fact that he violated a fiduciary relationship as a family member could be an aggravating factor. Martinez walked me through the process. Investigation would take several weeks, during which they'd trace every stolen dollar and build an airtight case. Richard would be arrested once the investigation was complete, probably at his workplace to maximize the impact. Are you certain you want to proceed? Prosecuting family members is emotionally difficult. I thought about the new RV in their driveway, purchased with my grandfather's money while Richard lectured me about not being real family. I thought about 3 years of systematic theft while I'd helped with their expenses out of genuine love for my mother and half-siblings. He stole from me for 3 years and then told me I didn't deserve the money because I'm not blood family. Family doesn't steal from each other, which means he stopped being family the moment he committed his first theft. Good. Victims who are clear about their position make stronger witnesses. That evening, Mom showed up at my apartment. She looked like she hadn't slept and her eyes were red from crying. Marcus, please. You can't do this to our family. I didn't do anything to our family. Richard did. He made a mistake. People make mistakes. Stealing $350,000 over 3 years isn't a mistake. It's a crime spree. You don't understand the pressure he's been under. Work stress, financial stress, planning for retirement. He wasn't thinking clearly. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down across from her. Mom, he told me yesterday that real children deserve my money more than I do because I'm not blood family. Does that sound like someone who wasn't thinking clearly, or someone who planned this theft and felt entitled to it? She was quiet for a long moment. He didn't mean it the way it sounded. How did he mean it? He's proud. He doesn't like feeling like he can't provide for his family. So he stole from his stepson instead of getting a better job or managing his money responsibly. Marcus, if you prosecute him, he'll go to prison. Our family will be destroyed. The family was destroyed the moment he decided I wasn't real family and started stealing from me. I've just made it official. She cried, then really cried, and I felt terrible for her. She was caught between her husband's crimes and her son's need for justice. But feeling terrible for her didn't change the facts. I've been helping you financially for years, I told her gently. I've paid for Jake's college, Emma's school fees, part of your mortgage and family vacations. All while Richard was stealing from me and telling himself I didn't deserve my own money. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he was taking money from your trust. But you knew we were living beyond your means. You knew Richard's salary couldn't support the lifestyle you were living. You just chose not to ask questions. The investigation moved quickly. FBI agents interviewed me twice, reviewed all my financial records, and traced every dollar Richard had stolen. They found that he'd used my trust fund money for the RV, a down payment on a vacation house in Florida, private school tuition for Emma, and a luxury car for himself. 3 weeks after I filed the complaint, they were ready to make arrests. Mr. Davidson, we'll be arresting your stepfather tomorrow morning at his office. We wanted to give you advance notice in case your family contacts you. The call came at 9:23 a.m. on a Thursday. Mom hysterical. They arrested Richard at work. FBI agents. Everyone saw. They're saying embezzlement, money laundering, wire fraud. Marcus, you have to stop this. I can't stop it, Mom. Richard committed federal crimes. But they're talking about 20 years in prison. 20 years, Marcus. That's what happens when you steal $350,000 from your stepson and spend it on toys. Please. I'm begging you. Work something out. Drop the charges. Anything. I can't drop federal charges, Mom. The government is prosecuting now, not me. Richard called from jail that evening, using his one phone call to contact me instead of a lawyer. Marcus, we need to talk man to man. We did that already. You told me real children deserve my money more than I do. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. Which part didn't you mean? The part about stealing my money or the part about me not being real family? Silence. Then, look, I can pay it back. We can sell the RV, the Florida place, everything. Make this right without involving the courts. You had 3 years to make it right. Instead, you stole more. I'm your stepfather. I've been in your life for 12 years. And you've been stealing from me for 3 of them. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month. Richard's attorney, a public defender named Patricia Webb, requested a meeting with me and the prosecutor to discuss a plea deal. My client is prepared to plead guilty to embezzlement charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, she explained. Full restitution plus interest and penalties. What kind of reduced sentence? Martinez asked. 5 years federal prison, 3 years supervised probation. Martinez looked at me. It's your call, Mr. Davidson. We can take this to trial and likely get the full 20 years, or accept a plea that guarantees conviction and restitution. I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. What guarantees do I have that he'll actually pay restitution? Court-ordered wage garnishment, asset seizure, and supervision by federal probation officers, Webb replied. He'll be required to pay 25% of all income directly to you until the debt is satisfied. Plus interest and penalties? Plus interest and penalties. Approximately $460,000 total. Richard would spend 5 years in federal prison and the next 15 years paying me back every penny he'd stolen plus interest. His credit would be destroyed, his career would be over, and his reputation would never recover. I'll accept the plea. The sentencing hearing was held 6 weeks later. Richard looked smaller somehow, wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, surrounded by federal marshals. Mom sat in the front row crying quietly. Jake and Emma refused to even look at me. Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed the case before imposing sentence. Mr. Davidson, You violated the fundamental trust between family members by systematically embezzling money from your stepson's trust fund. You used your position as a family member to gain access to these accounts, then stole money that was meant to secure the victim's future. She paused, looking directly at Richard. Your statements to the victim, that real children deserve this money more, and that he was not even blood family, demonstrate not just criminal intent, but a shocking lack of empathy for someone you claimed to love as a son. The sentence: 5 years in federal prison, 3 years supervised probation, and full restitution of $463,000. After the hearing, Mom approached me in the courthouse hallway. Are you satisfied now? She asked. Your stepfather is going to prison, our family is destroyed, and for what? Money. For justice, I replied. And it's not my stepfather going to prison. It's the man who stole from me for 3 years and then told me I didn't deserve my own inheritance because I'm not blood family. He's still my husband. Then you married a thief. 6 months later, I received the first restitution payment, $247.83, exactly the amount left in my trust fund after Richard's theft, garnished from his prison wages. At 25 cents per hour for prison labor, Richard would be working for the next 92,000 hours to pay me back. That's roughly 46 years of full-time work. I used the money to buy a stamp and mail him a thank you note. Dear Richard, I wrote. Thank you for the first installment on your debt. Only $462,752.17 to go. I hope you're learning valuable job skills in prison. You'll need them for the next several decades. Sincerely, your stepson, who apparently isn't real family. Some people might say I was too harsh. That family should forgive and forget. That money isn't worth destroying relationships over. But those people didn't spend 3 years being systematically robbed by someone who claimed to love them while believing they didn't deserve their own inheritance. Richard taught me an important lesson about family. It's not about blood relations or legal marriages. Real family doesn't steal from each other. Real family doesn't look you in the eye and tell you that you don't deserve what's rightfully yours. Real family protects each other, supports each other, and respects each other. Richard failed all 3 tests. His 5-year federal prison sentence was just the final grade. The notification popped up on my phone at 3:42 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing portfolio statements in my corner office. Sarah had posted another LinkedIn update, this time featuring a professional photo of herself at a tech conference podium with the caption that would change everything between us. I read the post 3 times before taking a screenshot. 2,847 likes and climbing. Comments flooding in from industry professionals, family friends, and networking connections, all praising Sarah's insights about entrepreneurial success while agreeing that some people just don't have what it takes. What none of those commenters knew was that Sarah's tech empire, the company she'd built her reputation on, the startup that had launched her speaking career, the business that funded her luxury lifestyle, existed entirely because of funding from the sister she was publicly humiliating. The relationship between Sarah's success and my money had started 3 years earlier, though she'd never made the connection. Her original business plan had been brilliant but underfunded. Traditional investors had passed, banks had declined her loan applications, and crowdfunding had raised less than 10% of her target. That's when Meridian Capital Partners, one of my shell companies, had approached her with an offer. $50 million in series of funding with remarkably favorable terms. No board seats required, minimal reporting obligations, and complete operational freedom. Sarah had been so grateful for the miracle investor that she'd never bothered to investigate who actually owned Meridian Capital Partners. For 3 years, I'd watched my sister build her tech empire on my money while treating me like the family disappointment at every gathering. She genuinely believed her success was entirely self-made. Her funding had come from smart networking, and her achievements proved she was the successful sibling while I was the one who never learned how to build anything meaningful. The irony had been educational until today. This LinkedIn post crossed a line from private family dynamics into public professional humiliation. Sarah had decided to use my supposed failures as content for her personal brand, and 2,847 people had validated her narrative. I opened my contact list and called David Morrison, my primary financial advisor. Emma, good to hear from you. How can I help? I need to discuss the Meridian Capital position in TechFlow Solutions. Sarah's company? The 50 million investment? What are you thinking? Complete withdrawal. I want every dollar pulled out by market close tomorrow. There was a long pause. Emma, that's essentially their entire funding base. Without Meridian's investment, TechFlow is looking at immediate insolvency. I understand the implications. This will destroy the company. 200 employees, dozens of client contracts, years of development work. Are you certain this is what you want? I looked at my phone screen, where Sarah's post now had 3,156 likes and comments like, "So true. Some people never figure out how to create real value, and your sister should learn from your example instead of making excuses." I'm certain. Begin the withdrawal process immediately. I'll need to review the investment agreements, but given the structure we used, I believe we can exercise the emergency liquidation clause. Should I prepare a statement for the other investors? What other investors? Right. Meridian is the sole funding source. This will be dramatic. David handled the technical details while I finished my day at the consulting firm where I maintain my cover as a mid-level business analyst. My colleagues had no idea that their quiet, unassuming coworker controlled investment portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The beauty of the Meridian capital structure was its complete anonymity. Sarah knew she'd received funding from a private investment firm, but the actual ownership was buried beneath layers of legal entities that made tracing nearly impossible. She'd built her entire empire on money from the sister she publicly mocked, and she'd never suspected the truth. That evening, I drove to Sarah's penthouse apartment in my modest Toyota Camry, the same car she loved to point out whenever family discussions turned to who was doing well in life. Her building's parking garage was filled with luxury vehicles, including her Tesla Model S that she'd purchased with what she believed were profits from smart business decisions. Sarah's apartment was everything mine wasn't: floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture, art pieces worth more than most people's annual salaries. All of it funded through distributions from Meridian Capital Partners, which she thought were investor dividends from successful company performance. "Emma, this is a surprise," Sarah said, opening her door with the kind of smile that suggested she was already planning to turn my visit into social media content. "What brings you to the successful side of town? I saw your LinkedIn post today." "Oh, it's doing incredibly well. Over 3,000 likes so far. I think it really resonated with people about the importance of persistence and vision." It was certainly revealing. Sarah gestured toward her living room, where her laptop was open to analytics dashboards showing TechFlow's performance metrics. The company was indeed performing well, growing rapidly, expanding into new markets, building a strong reputation in the tech industry. "I've been meaning to talk to you about goal setting," she continued, settling onto her designer sofa. "I know you've been struggling to find direction, and I think I could help you develop a more strategic mindset." Strategic mindset? Thinking bigger picture. Instead of just getting by with your consulting work, maybe consider what you could build if you really applied yourself. I looked around the apartment that existed because of my money while listening to my sister explain how I could improve my life by becoming more like her. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable. Take TechFlow, for example, she continued. 3 years ago it was just an idea. But through networking, persistence, and really understanding what investors want to see, I was able to secure the funding to make it happen. How much funding? 50 million Series A. Single investor actually, which is unusual but worked perfectly. Meridian Capital Partners, they're a private firm that specializes in tech startups with high growth potential. Do you know much about them? Sarah shrugged. Not really. They're very hands-off, which I appreciate. Some investors want constant updates and board seats and all that micromanagement stuff. Meridian just provides capital and lets entrepreneurs do what they do best. That does sound ideal. It is. And it's proof that when you have a solid business plan and the confidence to pursue it, the right opportunities will find you. That's what I meant in my LinkedIn post about some people just never learning. Success isn't complicated. You just have to be willing to take risks and think beyond small-scale consulting work. Friday morning brought a busy day of meetings with attorneys and financial advisors. The process of withdrawing $50 million from a company required careful coordination to minimize legal exposure while ensuring complete fund recovery. The withdrawal will trigger immediate cash flow crisis, David explained during our morning meeting. TechFlow's burn rate is approximately 4.2 million per month. Without Meridian funding, they have maybe 3 weeks of operating capital. What about their revenue? Growing but not sufficient to support current operations. They've been scaling aggressively based on expected continued investment. Classic startup model, grow fast, worry about profitability later. And Sarah's personal financial situation? Also tied to company performance. Her salary, bonuses, stock options, everything depends on TechFlow remaining viable. If the company collapses, she loses everything. The withdrawal process began at market open. By noon, TechFlow's bank accounts would show a $50 million outflow with no corresponding asset transfer or explanation. By afternoon, Sarah would receive notification that her primary investor had exercised their liquidation rights and terminated all funding agreements. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Sarah had been posting Instagram stories throughout the morning, photos of her corner office, screenshots of positive client feedback, inspirational quotes about entrepreneurship and persistence. At 12:47 p.m. the post stopped. At 1:15 p.m. my phone rang. Emma, something terrible has happened. Sarah's voice was shaking. Our investor pulled out. Completely. No warning, no explanation, just gone. That sounds serious. It's catastrophic. $50 million just disappeared from our accounts. Our lawyers are trying to figure out what happened, but the investment agreements apparently included some kind of emergency withdrawal clause. Why would they do that? I have no idea. Our performance has been excellent. Revenue growing, client satisfaction high, market expansion ahead of schedule. There's no logical business reason for this. I could hear Sarah crying on the other end of the line. 3 years of building her company, her reputation, her lifestyle, all of it crumbling because the investor she'd never met had decided to withdraw support. What does this mean for the company? We're basically bankrupt. Without that funding, we can't make payroll, can't pay suppliers, can't maintain our office lease. I'm looking at complete business failure within weeks. I'm so sorry, Sarah. The worst part is the timing. I just posted about success and persistence and now I'm facing total collapse. It's going to look like karma or something. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Sarah explaining the scope of the disaster while I made appropriate sympathetic responses. Her confidence had completely disappeared, replaced by panic about losing everything she'd built. The thing I keep thinking about, she said, is that LinkedIn post yesterday. Here I was talking about success and how some people never learn, and now I'm the one losing everything. The post was pretty harsh. I know. I was thinking about you when I wrote it, actually. About how you've been doing the same consulting work for years without really building anything bigger. But now, maybe there's something to be said for stability over growth. Maybe. I mean, you're not going to lose your job because your investor disappeared. You're not facing bankruptcy and public failure and having to explain to 200 employees why they're being laid off. The irony was perfect, but explaining it would serve no useful purpose. Sarah was learning the difference between success built on solid foundations and success built on borrowed capital, even if she didn't know the capital had been borrowed from the sister she'd publicly humiliated. Over the weekend, Sarah's LinkedIn post took on new significance as news of TechFlow's collapse spread through industry networks. The same people who had liked her insights about success and persistence were now commenting with sympathy about her unexpected investor betrayal. So sorry to hear about TechFlow, read one comment. Just goes to show how quickly things can change in the startup world. Your post about persistence feels even more relevant now, added another. Hope you can find a way to rebuild. Sarah's response was gracious but revealed her complete bewilderment. Thank you for the support. Sometimes success isn't just about what you build, it's about factors beyond your control. Learning to be humble about both victories and setbacks. Monday brought more conversations with Sarah as she navigated the practical aspects of business closure. The 200 employees would be laid off by Wednesday. Client contracts would be terminated with penalty payments she couldn't afford. The office lease would default, the equipment would be repossessed, and her personal guarantees on various business loans would trigger bankruptcy proceedings. I keep trying to understand what went wrong, she told me during our Tuesday phone call. Our business model was sound, our execution was excellent, our growth metrics were industry-leading. The only variable was investor confidence, and I have no idea what changed. Maybe they needed liquidity for other investments? Maybe. But the timing feels almost personal. Like someone wanted to watch us fail. That seems unlikely. Investors want returns, not revenge. You're probably right. It's just 3 years of my life gone overnight. My reputation, my team, my financial security. All dependent on someone else's decision that I had no control over. The following week, industry publications ran stories about TechFlow's collapse, focusing on the cautionary tale of startup dependence on single investors. Sarah was interviewed for several articles, where she emphasized the importance of diversified funding and the risks of anonymous investor relationships. The hardest lesson, she told TechCrunch, is that success without sustainable foundations is just an illusion. We built something remarkable, but it was built on someone else's money and someone else's confidence. When that disappeared, everything disappeared. The interviewer asked about her plans for the future. I'm taking time to reassess. Maybe looking at more stable opportunities, building something that doesn't depend on external funding or investor whims. Any interest in consulting work? Sarah laughed bitterly. Actually, yes. My sister works as a business consultant and I used to think that was small-time thinking. Now I'm realizing there's real value in work that you control, that doesn't depend on other people's continued support. 3 months later, Sarah called with an update. I've been doing some freelance consulting work, she said. Nothing dramatic, just helping small businesses with strategic planning and process improvement. How's that going? Better than expected. The pay is decent, the work is interesting, and most importantly, it's mine. No investors to please, no funding to worry about, no risk of someone pulling the rug out from under me. That sounds sustainable. It is. And Emma, I owe you an apology. That LinkedIn post about success running in our family except for you, that was unfair and mean-spirited. You've been doing steady, reliable work for years, building real skills and genuine value. I was so caught up in the glamour of my startup success that I forgot the importance of substance over flash. I appreciate you saying that. The truth is, you've been more successful than me this whole time. You built a career that couldn't be destroyed by someone else's whims. That's real security, real achievement. 6 months after TechFlow's collapse, Sarah had established herself as an independent business consultant specializing in sustainable growth strategies. Her LinkedIn posts now emphasize the importance of building businesses that could survive without external funding, learning from failure, and maintaining humility about success. The transformation was remarkable. The sister who had publicly mocked my small-time thinking was now advocating for exactly the kind of stable, self-reliant approach I'd always taken. We met for coffee on the anniversary of her LinkedIn post that had started everything. I've been thinking about that post a lot, she said, stirring her latte. About success and learning and what it means to really achieve something meaningful. What conclusions have you reached? That I was completely wrong about almost everything. Success isn't about how much funding you can raise or how fast you can scale. It's about building something that lasts, something that serves people, something that exists because of your effort rather than someone else's money. Those are hard lessons to learn. They are. And I learned them the expensive way. But maybe that's what I needed, to lose everything in order to understand what actually matters. I thought about the $50 million that had funded Sarah's empire and was now supporting scholarships for women entrepreneurs. Her failure had become opportunities for other people to build sustainable businesses without depending on anonymous investors who might disappear without warning. The strangest part, Sarah continued, is that I still don't know who Meridian Capital Partners really was. My lawyers tried to trace the ownership, but it's buried under so many legal structures that finding the actual person behind the investment is basically impossible. Does it matter who they were? I guess not. Maybe they were just business people who saw better opportunities elsewhere. Maybe they needed liquidity for personal reasons. Maybe they lost confidence in the tech sector. Maybe they didn't appreciate being taken for granted. Sarah looked at me curiously. What do you mean? Nothing specific. Just that investor relationships are still relationships. If someone provides capital that enables your success, maybe acknowledging that contribution matters more than most entrepreneurs realize. You might be right. I probably should have made more effort to understand and appreciate whoever was funding my company. Instead, I just took the money and assumed it would always be there. We finished our coffee while Sarah continued reflecting on lessons learned and opportunities gained through failure. She genuinely seemed happier as an independent consultant than she had been as a funded startup CEO. Walking to our cars, Sarah stopped and turned to face me. "Emma, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Do you think I'm a better person now than I was a year ago?" "I think you're more authentic now. More grounded. More aware of what you can control versus what you can't." That's what I hoped. The arrogance, the assumption that I had all the answers, the way I treated other people's choices as inferior to mine, all of that needed to go. Growth often requires losing things we thought we needed. Exactly. And sometimes the things we lose weren't really ours to begin with. Driving home, I reflected on the strange journey from Sarah's cruel LinkedIn post to her genuine transformation. My decision to withdraw funding had been motivated by frustration with her public humiliation, but the outcome had been more constructive than I'd expected. Sarah had learned humility, built real skills, and discovered the satisfaction of self-reliant success. Her collapse had forced her to develop authentic expertise rather than depending on borrowed capital and borrowed confidence. The $50 million was being put to better use funding women entrepreneurs who understood the value of sustainable business practices. Sarah's failure had become a foundation for other people's genuine success. Sometimes the most valuable education comes from losing everything you thought you wanted and discovering what you actually needed. Sarah had learned the difference between success and the appearance of success, between achievement and the illusion of achievement. And I had learned that the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. Sarah's LinkedIn post about family success had been cruel, but her journey from funded entrepreneur to independent consultant had ultimately validated the steady, sustainable approach she'd once mocked. The sister who had publicly dismissed my small-time thinking was now building exactly the kind of modest, reliable business she'd once considered beneath her. Sometimes the best way to prove your point is to let other people discover it for themselves, even if the discovery requires losing everything they thought they wanted first.